liberal theories. You think now you understand realist theories? Okay, you can better understand realism by studying liberal theories. Chapter. Today's class the goal of today's class. If you follow the textbook, right? Follow the textbook and checking facts, and I administer exam, multiple choice exam. So you're kind of oriented toward facts, right? Which is good, but also bad, right? Because you lose flow of thoughts. So the best way to encourage you to think about larger issues is that to write an essay exam. But we can't do that. Maybe at the end, in the final exam, maybe I could add a couple of essay exam questions. But before then, all multiple choice, we can't do that. The theme of today's class is just this. I mean, to get to know about, many different things about social liberal theories, but it's not simply you want to know about liberal theories, but there is an issue, there is an important issue to think about, which is the chapter begins with a section on the status of the state of today, the state of international relations today, right? The state of international relations today, which is important. Since 1991 up to now, like about a little bit more than 2 decades, how would you define 2 decades after 1991, which is post-Cold War period? How would you define post-Cold War period since 1991? That's what the first section is asking about. Are there more wars? The period since 1991, is it more peaceful or warlike? The period you're living in, right? Do we have more wars today since 1991, or wars are less frequent, right? Wars are waning, right? The waning of war. The waning of war, which is good news. The waning of wars. Less and less frequent, right? Maybe if we have some, maybe smaller type of wars. It's not full scale, major wars, right? Just several here and there skirmishing wars, right? But not major wars. That's the state of today, right? So some success and bad news for realists. Right? Bad news for realists. We learned about realism. According to realism, essentially, realism is about inevitability of war. War is inevitable, right? Because your peace is another one's war, right? Your security is another one's, your neighbor's insecurity. That's realism, right? But today's international relations, at least period since 1991, doesn't prove realism. At least, because the number of wars Like even 10 years ago, there were 20 wars. 10 years ago, there were 20 wars. But now, only 13. I can show you in a graph. This shows, which is in your textbook, like a human casualties. Right? There's a drastic decrease in human casualties relating to wars, right? Which is good news. So now, the main theme of today's class is how to explain this. If not realism, then how to explain? How to explain peace since 1991. That's the theme of today, which is a big question. Peace, international peace after 1991, or international peace post-Cold War period. Post-Cold War international peace. How to explain that? So this could be your essay question. There should be many reasons. And this textbook provides all very convincing reasons, basis for this, not perpetual peace, but at least, right? Peace after 1991. To give you answers in advance, there are 5 or 6 reasons, according to this chapter, chapter 3. There are 5 or 6 reasons. Number one, the reason peace after 1991, post-Cold War peace, number one reason is we have had good institutions. Good institutions. Institutions plus regimes. I mean, they distinguish between institutions and regimes, right? Institutions plus regimes. But more importantly, we have had good institutions. Not simply on paper, right? It's not paper institution, which is important, right? We have had many institutions in history. But in history, peace led to wars, right? Because those institutions were only on paper. Those were paper institutions. These are fake institutions. But probably this time, institutions we had, at least since 1991, might not be fake. Maybe working, really working. Some hope for institutions. So institutions could remove those concerns realists warned about, right? So institutions resolve some realist concerns. That's number one reason. Second reason could be found internal characteristics of states, internal characteristics of governments, which is more democracy. We have more democracies today than before. More democracy. Democracies are spreading. Because democracies assumption here is that democracies, they care about people, they care about peace. So when we have more democratic governments internally, they're less likely to wage a war with neighbors. So probably since 1991, we have less frequency of war, probably because there are many more governments turning democracies since 1991. But we have to prove this. Again, these are all hypotheses. Okay? All hypotheses. Democracies. Third reason, number 3. The third reason which is something new. Something new. In other words, we talk a little bit about this. Probably since 1991, international relations were driven not purely by power, but also by some shared ideas, norms, identities. People's thinking began to have an effect on international relations. People's thinking. Identities. To use more difficult words, identities, norms began to have an effect, real effect on international relations. Again, which contradicts realist assumptions. Realists, like I said, they shut their eyes on how people, right, think. Within the black box of the government, black box of the state, they don't care, right? But again, the potential for individuals, potential for human agency. Here, this is important terminology. Human agency. For the first time, human agency began to have an effect on international relations. They raised their voice. People raised their voice. People formed civil society, interest groups, then pressuring governments to loosen up about security threats, right? Maybe those security threats governments promoted maybe having fake. So people are realizing, right? People are realizing, then saying to the government that, hey, loosen up. There are no threats here, right? The threats you made up. We, as a people, we don't feel it. So loosen up, right? That's the idea. People's thinking, people's ideas, people's norms. Because those threats and peace are shaped by people for the first time since 1991. Not shaped by the government, right? For the first time, the concept of threats, the nature of international relations began to be shaped by people, grassroots, bottom up. That might have worked since 1991. So what is this called? This is called, we'll get to that, this is called constructivist turn in IR since 1991. Constructivist turn in IR. Here, the idea is that there was a raging debate in IR. Why did the Cold War end peacefully? Right? Why did the Cold War end peacefully? Then post-Cold War just emerged peacefully overnight, which is unusual, given the nature of international relations. Unusual. The reason there was a constructivist turn. Constructivist turn. Like, for instance, the leader at that time, the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, right? As a leader of the Soviet Union, which was weakening, he was realizing the mistakes his former predecessors have made. Then he began to promote his new thinking, the famous new thinking, openness, right? These ideologies, new Russian ideologies, right? Then sort of bridging the gap between the Soviet Union and one hand and the West, right? European countries and the United States, right? So this is how, without using any weapons, this is how the Cold War ended. Behind the scenes, what worked was norms, such as new thinking, right? Which is contradictory to realist thinking. So this is what is called the constructivist turn in IR since 1991. Now, another number four reason, collective security. Collective security has broadened. Collective security. Again, the notion of collective security has a bad reputation. Right? Collective security has a bad reputation. In other words, collective security in the idealist period between World War I, World War II, right, suffered a drastic fiasco. Collective security, right, in the form of the League of Nations. But maybe after 1991, under the aegis of the United Nations, again, the notion of collective security is getting a lot of attention, but this time really may be working this time. So that might have made a huge contribution to peace after 1991. So we need to rethink. Okay, we need to rethink about collective security this time, after 1991, right? The United Nations, peacekeeping, right? Human rights, intervention, those things, we need to think about it. Another one. My question. Wars in 19th century. Wars in the 19th century. There have been many reasons, right? There have been many reasons grounded in realist assumptions, many reasons. But one of the reasons that brought wars in the 19th century was, I think, the gap between rich countries and poor countries. Imperialist exploitation of poor countries in the South, right? Because 19th century was the highest stage of the imperialist evolution. How about today? If there are fewer wars, then what's going on about this notion, Marxist notion of North-South gap, rich country, poor country, exploitative relations? Is it North-South gap is widening, or North-South gap is narrowing? My assumption here is that probably North-South gap is narrowing, so that we have fewer wars. Think about it. Finally, the final reason, according to this textbook, the role of women have been disregarded in IR. Okay? Now is the time to think about the role of women, gender. Okay? So peace after 1991, what's the role of gender? There have been more women involved in IR, more peace. That's another assumption. Now, sorry, I need to add one more. Right after democratic peace, I need to add one more, which is economic interdependence. Peace after 1991, maybe due to economic interdependence. Economic interdependence. Countries today, they are connected more deeply through economic interdependence, through trade, investment, right? In all forms. So economically, countries are more interdependent, not dependent. Okay, dependent. When a country is dependent, that's a problem. That's a Marxist notion, dependent, right? But this is not dependent, but interdependent. They are mutually dependent. That's the meaning. So economically, countries are much more rich or poor, whatever, rich or poor, they are much more mutually dependent. That brings peace after 1991. So this is all. This is all. So you need to think about each of them. Think about each of them. The person, the great scholar who provided a basis for all of these, who is that person? Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, right? He's the great father of this liberal tradition of IR. 1725, he wrote a book, Perpetual Peace. 1725, he wrote a book, Perpetual Peace. In that book, he gave 3 out of other reasons. Okay, he studies how nations as a whole, how nations as a whole, they come up with peace. Okay, then he gave three important things. This is called Kantian triangle. Kantian triangle. This is peace. Okay? Peace revolves around by 3 things. Institutions. This is Kantian triangle. Very elementary type of liberal theory, but it's a great theory. Right? Peace requires 3 things. Although the terms are a little bit different. Institutions, he used terms like federation of states. This is like a League of Nations. Right? That's the term he used, federation of states. Democracy, he didn't use that term, democracy. Instead, he used republicans. Democracy was a bad term at that time. Republicans. Like a monarchy, responsible, accountable to people, that's a republican type of government. So republican is good for peace. When you have republicans, they are not aggressive to neighbors. Okay? Countries that are aggressive to neighboring countries, those are all dictators, not republican governments. That's what he observed. Trade, spirit of commerce. When countries have nurtured some type of spirit of commerce, that's a good sign for peace. In other words, countries, when they seek money, right? When they seek money, they don't trigger war. That's spirit of commerce, right? Although I think countries attempt war to make money, right? Sometimes. But at least this is what this great thinker observed. I think the debate here, a little bit philosophical debate, is we can understand this, right? These arguments sounds good, right? Sounds convincing. But as a realist, you might want to ask questions like, then, the states. I mean, Kant said institutions are important, okay? But how do states really get to cooperate with each other? We need to get to the bottom of that, really. Through what process? How do states, essentially driven by self-interest, right? As we know them, driven by self-interest. How do states give up on their self-interest, then get to cooperation or form institutions, then subject the self-interest to common interests? Right? We need to think about that. Is it really true? How does that happen? Right? A little bit abstract, philosophical, theoretical question. What does this textbook say about it? When, under what circumstances, states give up on their self-interest? How? How? There are several things. Before states get to cooperation, form institutions, and subject themselves to these institutions, real institutions, there are several things required. First, I think this textbook says there are several things needed. You see, why don't you turn to page 86. 86, right below figure 3.1. The section liberal theories. Five from the top. Liberal theorists. Here, liberal theorists generally see the rules of IR as slowly, incrementally evolving through time, becoming more and more peaceful. Not clear yet. This evolution of cooperation, right? This shows how cooperation emerges. This evolution results primarily from the gradual build-up of international organizations and mutual cooperation, parenthesis, reciprocity, secondarily from changes in norms and public opinion. Do you get that? Are you persuaded? Are you persuaded? You think that really, wow, this is how countries cooperate. This is how countries give up on their self-interest. Wow. It's worthwhile for them to, right, forget about their self-interest. Do you get that feeling? Not yet. Not yet. But there is an important terminology here, reciprocity. Reciprocity. In other words, at least countries, they learn how to cooperate through this reciprocity. In other words, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's the basis of cooperation. Probably most fundamental trigger for cooperation. If you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Reciprocity. Reciprocity. Second, okay, based on this reciprocity, or tit for tat, then if the experience, if the relationship between, right, originally hostile relations between countries, okay, hostile relations, if the relation is repeated, this is important, repeated, okay, first there should be reciprocity, should be reciprocal relationship. Second, should be repeated through time. Then you can get to cooperation, if it's repeated. Okay? Because you think you don't get absolute gains from relating to your neighbors, but you can get at least relative gains. In other words, you learn your relationship with your neighbors is not zero-sum game. At least there is something that you can gain from. Non-zero-sum game. And the textbook goes on to provide examples. Examples how this type of reciprocity, cooperation occurs in international relations. The example of China-US relations, 1970s. He gives that example, US-China relations. And US-Russia relations regarding, missile defense issues. And Israeli-Palestine relations, that's another example. Regimes, the difference between institutions and regimes, the definition of regimes. Let me ask someone. Aidan, would you give us the definition of regimes in conjunction with institutions? International regimes. What is international regime? The definition of regime. Okay. International regime is a set of rules, norms, procedures. Rules, norms, procedures, around which the expectations of actors converge. This is the definition. Regime is a set of rules, norms, procedures around which the expectations of actors converge in certain issues. Right? there are issues that might arouse conflict among countries, right? Like nuclear non-proliferation, international trade, international security, there are environmental issues, climate change, there have been many issues. Regimes occur when a set of rules, norms, procedures are built up. And around that, countries, okay, actors, their expectations, I mean, some kind of predictions can be made around which these issues, okay? How other countries might move, you can have a little bit of prediction within that regime, which is important for cooperation. Is this a regime? Is this class a regime? Do we have set of rules, norms, procedures? Yes, I think we have rules, right? We have norms. The norm, the learning norm here, well, I haven't think about it, but they must have some norm here, right? Norm here, right? They're having norm. The learning norm, right? I stand up, prepare, teach, then you learn. That's one of the norm, right? There must have been some code of conduct you must abide by, right? You should not, plagiarize such and such, right? You need to prepare before you come to class, right? Otherwise, this class can't go on, right? And you might not cooperate if you don't have these regimes. If you don't have these rules and norms, you might not cooperate. You might not listen to what I say, right? When I take exams, when I administer the exam, you might not come to the exams, right? Procedures. We have procedures. So for international cooperation, countries need this type of class type of, okay, rules, norms, procedures, right? Yes, that's important for cooperation. When these things are ready, countries are ready to cooperate. That's what it means. Okay? Although again, there is possibility. There is possibility of, there is one thing. I mean, regime's one thing. Institution is one thing. Then state behavior is another. Really separate. There's a danger, right? There's a danger. Okay? So that institutions are always paper institutions. Regimes are always fake regimes. That's possible, right? That's possible. That's the critique of realists, okay? But like I said, after 1991, the situation here changing a little bit. You might have real regimes. You might have real institutions. Collective security. Collective security, again, the definition, it should be distinguished from alliance. Okay, it should be distinguished from alliance. Collective security is a broad alliance of most states. It's a broad. It's almost like a federation. Okay, federation of most actors in international relations. Like I said, Kant laid out the rationale for this, the Federation of States or the League of Nations. Let me quote what President Woodrow Wilson said in 1919 when he laid out his vision of the League of Nations. In January 1918, in his address to the US Congress, okay, President Wilson laid out his famous 14 points. Okay? In point 14, he called for the formation of a general association, quote unquote, a general association of nations that would provide the basis for order in the international system. Then later he elaborated on this. Okay? He noted that the nations of this association would bind themselves to use economic pressure or military force against any state which should go to war without first resorting to peaceful measures, peaceful means. So it was the application to the Society of Nations of the principle in force in every state. The lawbreaker who violates the rights of another finds the combined force of society arrayed against them. So, what Woodrow Wilson was proposing was a system of collective security. Again, collective security in 1991, when a country invaded Kuwait, neighboring Kuwait, over oil fields issues. Right? So collective security again was summoned. Right? But that time, for the first time, collective security was working. For the first time in history. So Iraq was punished, right? So Woodrow Wilson's dream was coming true in the Iraqi case. And the concept of collective security, like I said, since 1991, is broadening. So I think you might want to study more on these collective security issues today. How is it working now? Right? Is it really up to its name today? Any different from collective security in the idealist period? That's the point. Democratic peace, the next section. Bear with me. 5 more minutes, then we take a break. Kim Min-gi, what is the democratic peace about today? 1991 post-Cold War peace. What do you want to say about democratic peace, the idea of democratic peace? Do we have more democracies today? Is democracy spreading? Yes. How is it related to peace? More democracies, more peace?
I think, as you said, economic interdependence now is peace. So with democracy and with open markets, democracy brings down peace.
Okay. Could you define the notion, the concept, democratic peace? What is it about? What's the definition of democratic peace? What does it mean? Democratic peace. Does it mean that autocracy, dictator, the wars between dictators, does it happen, or what does it mean? Wars between democracies, what does it mean? The theorem itself, the principle itself. 신민규, 윤재상, give us the definition of democratic peace. What do you want to look at in that theory?
Countries that believe in democracy should not
okay, between democracies, right? That doesn't necessarily mean democracies, democratic countries never wage a war. Democratic countries might wage a war against bad countries, right? In fact, democratic countries, they wage more wars. Countries like Britain, France, right, happen to be, they wage more wars than dictators, right? So the definition of democratic peace, what it means is that there are less wars between democracies. That's what democratic peace means, right? But one condition, in general, the period since 1991, there has been a huge move toward democracy, right? The democratic transition on a global scale. So that there are many studies that shows how many democracies, how many countries turning democracy. There are many studies like that. Clearly, there's a trend toward democracies, right? From dictatorships to democracies. But one question that could be raised, the democratic peace theory, is that how about countries that are in a transition to democracy? The implication for peace, that is something you need to think about it. In general, there is a move toward democracy, but many more countries are still in a transition to democracy. There have been some uncertainties about implications for peace. Okay? So that transition gets bumpy, right? So the move toward peace maybe also can get rough. That's kind of point this textbook is making. Constructivism and postmodernism, or complex theories. Constructivism, postmodernism, then Marxism, then gender theory. The first, constructivism and postmodernism. I think constructivism is one of the most innovative theories that have made a huge difference in IR, particularly after 1991. As a liberal social theory, many phenomena that after 1991 in IR not clearly explained by realists. Many of them fall in this category of constructivism. Again, the most important things about constructivism, unlike as opposed to realism, is, I think, like we discussed, norms, ideas, human agency. Okay, individuals are important. Human agency, norms, ideas, human agency, civil society, transnational advocacy movement, transnational movement, okay, NGOs, those are related. So according to constructivists, IR since 1991, okay, get around many of the traditional categories, conceptions of realists, okay, that are defined in terms of power. Power and the state. the difficulty of constructivism is that we know that these norms, ideas, human agency, all important in IR. But how do we, real examples of how norms and ideas affect IR? As a real example, I gave you one example of the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War, neither realism nor liberalism explained the end of the Cold War. Why the Soviet Union peacefully collapsed, right? Peacefully collapsed without sort of any type of resistance. The Soviet Union peacefully collapsed. How do you explain that? That's a dilemma, right? To many realists or even liberals. Liberal theories, traditional liberal theories, they could not explain the end of the Cold War. Because, traditional liberal theories, either through trade, right? Or institutions, or democracy. The Soviet Union collapsed peacefully. According to liberals, they collapsed probably because US, Soviet, both of these countries were economically interdependent. Trade relations deepened. So the Soviet Union collapsed. That must have happened, but that didn't happen. So liberals don't explain the end of the Cold War. Soviet Union, was it democratized? Maybe a little bit. But liberals don't 100% explain, right? Many scholars point to constructivism, the idea of peaceful thinking, particularly one proposed by Mikhail Gorbachev, new thinking, peaceful thinking, right? Then East Germany, Eastern European countries, jump on that peaceful wagon, right? Then how the entire Eastern world sort of collapsed. Then Europe became one, right? So constructivism, what are they interested? They're interested in how actors define their national interests. So far, according to realists, national interests are just given. No doubt about it. National interests given. It's a black box. You can't see inside. Right? You can't see the inside of the national interest. It's just given. But constructivists, they want to dissect how national interests are driven from the bottom up. What is this process called? This process is called socialization. Socialization process. So constructivists, they take seriously this socialization process. National interest through socialization. This is important for constructivists. From the bottom up. So individual approach. From individuals up to society, then to national level. How national interests aggregate. That's what constructivists do. How national interests aggregate from the bottom up to the government level. So socialization is important for constructivists. Broader social relations. constructivism puts IR in the context of broader social relations, which is right, exactly right. Meanwhile, realists and neoliberals, they tend to simply take state interest as given. And more importantly, state interests, according to realists, state interests are based more than anything else on material interests. Material interests, okay? But for constructivists, state interests are not simply on material interests, non-material ones. Non-material ones, more important. This textbook provides many interesting examples about norms, identities, how norms move people, how norms move countries. This textbook provides a lot of interesting examples. MP3 analogy. Can anyone tell us MP3 analogy? In understanding constructivism, how people's behavior, human behavior, is driven by sometimes material incentives, right? Material incentives. Same for countries. Countries driven by material incentives, right? Calculating cost, right? Cost-benefit analysis, right? Humans, governments, same. But sometimes, both governments and humans, they're not simply by these cost-benefit analysis, right? They're driven sometimes by non-material things, like MP3. When people decide to buy certain kind of MP3s, right? They calculate how much is it expensive, right? Things like that. But sometimes they pay for more if it's really attractive. Right? This is non-material behavior. Non-material behavior. On which constructivism is based. So countries sometimes, right? They don't care about weapons. They don't care about the trade benefits. They care sometimes really about which is appropriate, socially appropriate, which is more attractive, their image, things like that. Sometimes countries, their behavior based on these strange things. So constructivists, they study this. So based on these non-material things, they can explain many strange things in IR. Under realist assumptions. Like for instance, a lot of constructivists raise questions about this notion of anarchy. Realist assumption of anarchy. Or realist assumption about self-help, security dilemma, inevitability of war, things like that. Constructivists, they dissect these traditional realist assumptions, then argue, proceeding from these ideas, norms, these ideas, they reevaluate state behaviors. A lot of unexplained things they can explain. Like for instance, threats countries feel. It might vary under different circumstances. Okay, threats are not same. threats can vary from situation to situation. Like for instance, threats North Korea poses. Okay, threats North Korea poses. Obviously, North Korean threats felt bigger to the United States, but North Korean threats to South Koreans are not as big as to the United States, right? So how could realists say North Korea as a country poses a threat universally? You can't say that. Threats, different countries feel differently, depending on where you stand. Where you stand, then your norms, ideas, social interactions. South Koreans, why South Koreans feel less threats from North Korea? Because South Koreans, North Koreans, according to constructivists, we've had social interactions. Social interactions. And kinds of threats we feel, South Koreans feel about North Korea is socially reconstructed. It's not the same threat the United States gave down to South Koreans. Different kind of threats. According to constructivists. This is socialization. This is socialization. This is reanalysis of threats, security dilemma, things like that. Another example, European Union example. Another example. European Union is another constructivist example. European countries throughout centuries. Throughout centuries. There has been a high level of resentment, right? European countries. They have had wars. But today, it's a federation of states. It's a united European Union. The reason for the unity is identity formation, common identity formation. Realists can't explain that. Pirates example. What's the pirates example? 이준구. What are the pirates examples? Why is it important for constructivism? Again, this is contradictory to realism. Pirates example contradict realism. Why is that? Yes.
And although it is posed as a threat, we kind of see it as we undermine the threat and by incorporating them into the culture.
Okay, you're almost getting there, but 임건, can you elaborate more? Why pirates example is a good example of constructivism, or it's a good example of fallacy of realism? Okay, study that. Okay, Somalia example, study that. Why a good constructivist example? Now, Another example, Switzerland. That's another example. Why Switzerland claims to be a neutral state. That's another example of how norms drive countries. State behavior based on norms and ideas. So study those examples. Okay, study those examples. Those examples are important. Although I think that the example of science bureaucracies in Latin America and developing countries, they're a little bit odd examples. Then, page 102. Read carefully. Critique of constructivism. In other words, weaknesses of constructivism. There are weaknesses. What realists say about constructivism, right? You make sure that you read that. What liberals say about constructivism, right? As a weak theory. You need to cover that. Postmodernism. Postmodernism essentially is not IR theory, right? Essentially, it is a theory mostly in literature, originated in literature studies. Postmodernism, there are several things postmodernism really look at. Postmodernist scholars, several things what these scholars look at. Number one, they care a lot about texts and discourses. Texts and discourses. So when postmodernists criticize realism, okay, they mostly criticize realist scholars' words and arguments. The central thesis is just this. There is no single objective reality. There is no single objective reality. Everything is discourse. Everything is discourse. No one knows who speaks truth. That's the attitude. That's the attitude of postmodernists. There is no single objective reality. There's just multiplicity of experiences and perspectives. So, according to this, there are several, like a line of critiques about realism. Number one, according to postmodernists, the states, the key concept of realist, right? States are fiction. States are fiction. Fake. States are fake. Okay? States are fake. So, then state interest, national interest, fake. There is no such thing as a national interest. Governments are just lying to people. When they talk about national security, it's a lie. It's a fiction. From postmodernist perspective, it's a fiction. It's a lie. Simply lie. Okay? They don't have the right to say about national interest because they don't represent reality. So states, fictional. This is one line of argument. States are fictional. What is this kind of process called? Interpretive process. This process is called interpretive or discursive process. Turning everything upside down. This is discursive, interpretive process. Questioning everything that was given previously as truth. So for instance, the Soviet Union, the Soviet state was masquerading as a state, but in fact, the Soviet Union was a fake state because inside there are many different real states, like 15 different states, or even more different states inside the Soviet Union. So Moscow, the Soviet leader, they were just, as a fiction leader, fake leader, they are just masquerading as leaders. That's how postmodernists analyze. Is it interesting or disgusting? So they seek to deconstruct, so to speak, deconstruct. These are important terms. Deconstruct the conventional assumptions, right? And they look for hidden meanings or subtext. But again, postmodernists, they share a lot with liberals or constructivists. Probably constructivism is one of the postmodern theories, right? So they share a lot with liberals in terms of bringing back individuals, right? Like I said, individuals, domestic politics, right? Multinational corporations. These are important subjects of study for many postmodern scholars, IR scholars. So in that sense, liberalism, postmodernism, they share a lot. They have many things in common. Page 103, right above the section of Marxism. Why don't you read carefully this last paragraph? Won-Chang, would you please read this last paragraph? Right above Marxism section. Postmodern critique of realism.
Realism focuses so narrowly because its aim is to reduce IR to a simple, coherent model. The model is claimed to be objective, universal, and accurate. To postmodernists, the realist model is none of the things. It's a biased model that creates a narrow and one-sided story for the purpose of promoting the interests of powerful actors. Postmodernists seek to destroy this model along with any other model, including neoliberalism, that tries to represent IR in simple objective categories. Postmodernists instead want to celebrate the diversity of experiences that make up IR without needing
think this is the best description. This is the best description of realism, but at the same time, best description of postmodernism. Like I said, what realists seek, what they seek is model, scientific model. So realists are driven by scientific modeling, objective modeling, prediction, future prediction. But with that scientific modeling, a lot of things are omitted, right? That's what liberals come in, right? That's when postmodernists come in. They bring back those omitted things like individuals, society, domestic politics, leaders, right? These things that were omitted on the scientific realist model. But postmodernists, the difference between postmodernists and liberals is that postmodernists, they tend to be much more progressive and leftist oriented. Because one of the assumptions, one of the challenges postmodernists make to realists is that realists, they are in favor of rich people, powerful countries. Right? In so doing, realists, right? They side with powerful countries. They promote the interests of powerful countries. There are many famous scholars, their names, in this tradition of IR studies, postmodern scholar. There are several big names. So if you continue studying IR, you might want to read some of the books written by them. Big names in the postmodern tradition, big names in the constructivist tradition, big names in the liberal tradition, big names in the realist tradition. Realist tradition, I told you already, one person, Hans Morgenthau, big name in realism. Big name in liberalism, succeeding Immanuel Kant, in the contemporary era, big name in liberal tradition, Michael Doyle. Michael Doyle, big name, very big name, probably the biggest name. Constructivism, Alexander Wendt. Alexander Wendt, the big name, biggest name in constructivism. Still alive, relatively young guy. I don't know where he's teaching. He's teaching at one of the big schools in the United States. Alexander Wendt, big constructivist scholar. Probably he's one of the big U.S. schools. Alexander, maybe Yale. Maybe Yale. He's the inventor of constructivism. Wendt is the inventor of constructivism. Postmodern, Cynthia Enroe. Names like this, Cynthia Enroe, big name, postmodern study. Then Marxism. If you don't have questions about constructivism, postmodernism, any questions? Questions? Okay, Marxism. Marxism. Rich tradition. It has a long-standing tradition in IR, Marxism. Essentially, Marxism looks at major causes of war and peace at the level of domestic politics, right? Like in liberalism. They looks at domestic politics, but particularly economic classes. So they argue war and peace are the causes of class struggles. The gap between rich and poor. That is the main cause of war and peace. That's Marxism. Class struggles. So IR basically is class struggles. IR is about class struggles. Struggles between rich countries, poor countries. Or struggles between rich class, poor class at domestic politics, domestic level. It originated in the theory of Marx, Karl Marx. Originated in the books written by Karl Marx in the 19th century. But the difference between Karl Marx and later Marxists, other successors, there's the difference, right? The original Marx theory, then successors, they're different, right? How are they different? How are they different? In the early like type of Marxism and later type of Marxism different. What's the difference?
Lenin used violence to control the masses. And compared to Marx, he was more violent and he used the principle of imperialism.
Who? Lenin.
Yeah.
Lenin used the principle of imperialism. Right.
So that's what
Okay, so your argument, Lenin is imperialism. Okay? Lenin is imperialism. Marxism, Marx is what?
more calm approach to
Really?
domestic.
Domestic. Yes, domestic. In other words, Marxism in the times of Karl Marx was limited to domestic politics. Domestic class struggle. In other words, Marxism in the times of Karl Marx didn't think about the implications of domestic class struggles for international politics. They didn't think about it. It was limited to domestic class struggles, internal class struggles. Okay? And one more. Marxism in the times of Karl Marx, again, basically politics was about class struggles, right? Rich people, exploitation, poor people, working class, right? So working class, to get around that situation, they need to revolt. They need to revolt. But who will revolt? That's the question. Who will revolt? Peasants revolt, not workers. There was a wrong assumption. It's a message from Karl Marx. There's a wrong assumption. So Karl Marx proceeded from the assumption that peasants will revolt. But no, that was the wrong assumption. So there was two things about Karl Marx. Lenin, Marxism entered another stage. Lenin, Marxism entered another stage with Lenin. In other words, class struggle on the Lenin period becomes globalized. It's called globalization of class struggle. Globalization of class struggle. Now, Hong Jong-wan, can you explain this globalization of class struggle by Lenin? How does class struggle export it? Like ingenuity of Lenin. He improved Marx theory. Lenin improved Marxism. So that Marxism becomes an IR theory by Lenin. How? 광래영. How Marxism becomes internationalized under Lenin?
It was kind of spread out to explain the division between the North and the South as a globalized bloc, not only limited in the domestic class level.
Okay. In other words, more attention to exploitation by rich countries over poor countries. More attention to that. Okay. Lenin paid more attention to that. It's not simply exploitation of working class or peasants. It's about rich countries' exploitation. Okay. Gensha Capella. Anything else? No? 권세원. Anything else? 김기훈. Anything you want to add? What is stated here? Yeah, there's so many things here. There's so many things. Hidden meanings. There are hidden meanings. You need to deconstruct. You need to become a postmodernist to study this textbook. You don't necessarily believe what this textbook says. Okay? Because the textbook, there is no single reality. Okay? You don't need to believe in these facts. But there's so many things here. So many things, which has become the stumbling blocks of today's North-South relations, North-South theory. What else? So Lenin provided the basis for today's rich country, poor country relations. What did he see? What did Lenin see at that time, in his times? Won-Cham, yes.
I think that he predicted the gap between rich and poor, between North and South, that that definitely the problem will occur in poor countries. So maybe he thought that he may introduce this kind of studies in poor countries, maybe to make a revolution. And by doing so, they can create like socialism, where the imperialists will be, disappear, and all the people around the world will be like equal in the rights. Yeah, and the main tool will be government, which controls all of the aspects of their lives.
Did you learn it from the textbook or did you learn it from your school years?
School year.
School years. Okay. You're right. The times Lenin living in, imperialist time, right? Imperialist time. In other words, he saw many big, great powers, like building colonies, right? Building colonies far from their home country. He saw that, right? He saw that. He saw many great European powers, not Russia, but right? Different European countries, building colonies far from their home countries, which is, to him, very new. Very new. Then he asked, why would these countries need these colonies? That's the question he asked first, right? Why would these countries need like a second like a home outside their country? The reason was found in internal economic contradictions, capitalist contradictions. Capitalist economy, when enters a higher stage, in other words, when capitalism develops deeply, then inevitably capitalism becomes finance-oriented. In other words, finance-oriented meaning manufacturing industry dies. Manufacturing industry dies, then financial sector grows much larger than manufacturing sector. This financialization of the economy requires these colonies to make more profits. To make more profits. That's imperialism. Important thing, these big great powers building colonies to gain surplus profits, then bringing back, then bribing working class, paying off working class. Discontents. To tame discontents of working class. That's important. That's important. Earn surplus profits from colonies, paying back to working class. Now, then the question is the gap between North and South today broadening, widening, right? That question, I think, is something you can follow up with today. Again, I think capitalism, world economy today is becoming highly financialized. Highly financialized. Like economies like the United States, economies like the United Kingdom, highly financialized. They source out manufacturing industries to developing countries, right? Then the United States, the UK, they become the center of global finance. Manufacturing industries outside the United States, outside the United Kingdom, right? That's similar. Then money from the Wall Street is circulated globally, right? As hot money, right? So you can compare, I mean, you know, how much like similarity between Lenin's stage of imperialism and today's North-South relationship. Now, get to peace studies. Before we get to peace study, right above peace studies, this textbook says Marxism still important. That's how he concludes. Marxism still important. Low visibility theory, but still important. Peace study. Again, peace study looks at war and peace, right? Major subjects of peace studies, war and peace. But from different perspectives. Different perspectives from realism and also liberalism. But peace studies has much in common with liberalism, but a lot of difference from realism, right? So peace study scholars, they look at war and peace from the perspective of individual responsibility. I'm just reading from this textbook. Individual responsibility, economic inequality. These are things that they take seriously. Economic inequality, gender relations, cross-cultural understanding, and other aspects of social. Social again is important. Social relationships. What they directly contradict is the assumptions of realism. Peace studies again directly contradict realist assumptions. The meaning of studying peace from a broad or social perspective. What is it like studying peace from a broad perspective. That is important to understand. Studying peace from a broad social perspective. Essentially, I think studying peace from a broad social perspective, I think we need to think about two kinds of concepts. This textbook talks about negative peace, concept of negative peace, and positive peace. Positive peace. The goal of peace studies is to study positive peace, not negative peace. Okay? Positive peace. That's the goal. Then what is positive peace? What is negative peace? That's important. What is positive peace? What is negative peace? Which is page 108. 108, last paragraph. It's an explanation of positive peace, negative peace. 김다운. What is positive peace?
Peace that resolves the underlying reasons for war.
Can you speak up?
Peace that resolves the underlying reasons for war.
Okay. And what is did I ask negative peace or positive peace? Positive peace, okay. I should have begun with negative peace. What is negative peace? What is negative peace? Kim Min-kyung, what is negative peace? Here's the definition. Negative peace is kind of peace that means the temporary absence of war. Temporary absence of war. This is from a realist perspective. Realist perspective. Because peace for realists is the absence of war. For realists, this is minimum definition of peace. For realists, peace is the absence of war. But peace studies, they want to broaden the definition of peace so that to include much broader kind of peace, which is positive peace. It's not simply the absence of war, but more broader kind of peace, which includes peace that resolves, as Kim Daun said, peace that resolves the underlying reasons for war. In other words, peace study scholars, when they mean peace, they look at a condition where every small possibility of war is removed. That's peace. That's positive peace. Right? Positive peace. In other words, it's a transformation. It's a transformation of relationships, according to this textbook. Positive peace is a transformation of relationships. Individual, social, everything, state. So it's not simply government stop fighting. It's not simply dropping weapons. Much more than that. So it's a broad social, economic, and psychological, right? So a lot of peace study scholars, they study deeply into militaristic culture. Militaristic culture. This is a very, this is a kind of topic they like very much. Militarist culture. In other words, to remove war, they need to study the culture of that society, whether or not that society has a militaristic culture. To remove war, to attain positive peace, they need to get to the bottom of the culture of that society. That's militarism, militaristic culture. In other words, this is otherwise called the social construction of war. They look at how war is socially constructed. This is the kind of topic they like very much. The social construction of war. Again, according to peace study scholars, it's important for social organizations, grassroots groups, they disseminate, right? Disseminate cultures of peace, nonviolence movement. That's important, nonviolence movement. Peace movement, right? Gender theories. Gender theories, like postmodern theories, it cuts broad scope of different disciplines, from literature to many different disciplines. But this author says, in recent years, gender theories enters IR. They have made inroads into IR. Okay, now their selling point. What is gender theory selling point in IR? The selling point of gender theories in IR. They argue particularly toward realist theories, they argue that traditional IR theories are biased, again, biased, gender biased. Traditional notions, assumptions of IR mostly, predominantly biased by male, right? So we need to reshape the entire IR discipline by bringing in gender factor. Then we have a different assumptions about war and peace, anarchy and all these different concepts. We might have to reshape all these different assumptions when gender is factored in. And these gender scholars, they often point to like the dominance of the IR field by showing the number of scholars, key figures in IR studies, like the number of male scholars, the number of female scholars, then giving the data that says, the famous top 25 IR scholars. Then of these 25 top IR scholars, only 2 or 3 are females. Or the international data that shows that how many female leaders in legislature or the executive, how many female leaders, right? Or particularly foreign policy decision making, how many female leaders? These are all important things they take into consideration. Then there are 3 different types of gender IR theories. There are 3 different types of gender IR theories. Page 112. Page 112. This section lays out 3 different strands of gender IR theories. Number 1, difference feminism. Difference feminism. Second, liberal feminism. Third, postmodern feminism. So broadly speaking, IR gender theories fall in these 3 types. Difference feminism. Difference feminism argue, essentially, they argue that women and males, they are different. They proceed from that assumption. Women, male, different. They play different roles. But the important assumption, particularly in IR, is that women are different in the sense that they are more caregiving and they raise children. So when they are put into foreign policy making positions, they may be doing a better job of making peace with neighboring countries. So the implication of gender here is that it has a huge implication for war and peace. It has a huge implication. So women are seen potentially more effective than men. Women are more effective than men in conflict resolution, or as well as in group decision making. So the assumption here, which is important, is that unlike postmodern or liberal feminism, there's a real difference between male and female. Real difference. It's not socially constructed. It's not socially constructed or culturally indoctrinated. It's a real difference. But women, they can do a better job. I haven't read any books regarding this type of theories, but you can imagine as a maybe difference feminist scholar, if you write a book, or if you write a book, or if you study an event of great international significance, then how would you write a book? How would you do research? I'm very curious to know that. But if you proceed from this assumption, then what you can think of, what you can imagine how they would write a book is that probably like in studying World War I, in studying World War I, as a female scholar, as a gender scholar, particularly as a difference feminist scholar, they would like look into the roles, the wives of major admirals or major decision makers at that time, their roles of wives. They might look into that, or because there were not many female leaders at that time, right? Maybe none. If there were one or two, I mean, they should be the focus of study. Then always again, the implication of those roles of women for war and peace, that's the focus, right? That's the focus. So in historical study, there are some things that you might want to revisit. Then look at the particular roles women might have played. That's kind of direction you could go. Liberal feminism, they reject the difference. There is no real difference between male and female. So there's no essential difference, right? That's liberal feminist perspective. Postmodern feminism, there are feminists that are very postmodern, right? They reject everything. You know, when I was in the United States as a graduate student, in our graduate school, there was one feminist scholar, lady, relatively young. She's quite famous. Cynthia Weber, very well known in this field. Not Cynthia Enroe, Cynthia Weber. Quite well known, very aggressive. Wearing like men. She always, her clothes like, and she doesn't marry a man. She's married to her partner instead. She's married to a girl. She's married to a lady. She calls her partner, right? Then, so I remember vividly what she said, things like that, you know, the books she introduced, because she taught introduction, like at the graduate school level. She covered broad, you know, international field at that time for a graduate student. She brought a lot of gender-related books to class. They introduced those books to us. So I had some experience reading those. It was not a good experience. In fact. I think the rest of it you can read. I mean, same thing is repeated, right? So we covered pretty much. But remember the question. The whole point of studying liberal social theories is that thing. The first question I raised in the beginning, why peace after 1991? Could these different theories provide some kind of rationale? So you need to think about it. Friday, you just, right, enjoy holidays. Then come back Tuesday 4 o'clock, Tuesday 2 o'clock. Just Right, regular 12 class, chapter 4,